Welcome to a special Friday night episode of Jets Afterburners podcast. And here we are joined by a very special guest here. Now, he is the editor of Jet Nation, host of Jet Nation Radio, the man himself, Glenn Naughton. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thanks for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it. A very active time of year and a very active week specifically for the Jets right now. So plenty to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. And let's hit it off right now. New head coach of the New York Jets, former player, former first-round pick, 94 draft, in which the Jets had to trade, ironically, with the New Orleans Saints in order to get the services of Aaron Glenn. And same thing, so many years later, the Saints wanted Glenn as their head coach. We stepped right in. Thank goodness for a snowstorm. That doesn't happen that much in Louisiana. And he stayed here, signed the contract. What are you looking for? Because not for nothing, I've been on Spaces. I've been on Twitter, X, whatever the case is. And there was always a very loud voice. The only one that I could hear louder than above all, we need to select and we need to sign on the dotted line, Aaron Glenn. And that was you. That's why I needed to get you on the show.
Yeah, well, look, I've said from the start of this process that, like a lot of Jets fans, I was hoping this team would go in the direction of offense and get it. I love Todd Monken. I wanted a guy like him to come in. We heard the name Liam Cohen. We heard some people saying maybe Cliff Kingsbury, a guy who I'm sort of iffy on just because he acknowledged after his last job that maybe, he wasn't ready to be a head coach or that he preferred focusing on being a coordinator. But when it started to become clear that the top offensive guys didn't want to come here, I'd said from the outset that I didn't prefer defense, but if it was going to be defense, then get me Aaron Glenn.
Right.
Because you want a guy who's seen it all, who's done it all, been a player, started at the lowest ranks as a scout, on the advice of Bill Parcells, who I've seen some people for some reason sort of downplay their relationship. Oh, just because they have a cup of coffee every now and then, he's a mentor. Like, no, he literally is the guy. Right. Not just an ex-coach, but he gave Aaron Glenn the roadmap. Like, Aaron Glenn retired. He took a couple of years off and realized, you know what? I want to get back into football. And he contacts Parcells, who tells him, if you're going to do this, do it right. Go be a scout first. Work the road for a couple of years at the bottom and then work your way all the way up to the top. And there were steps, there were throughout his journey where Parcells would tell him, like, you're ready for the next step. Like, go do this. And so he wasn't just a guy he talked to sometimes. And even now, as in his latest job as a coordinator with the Lions, Parcells would call him after games. If for anyone who's not heard it, I plugged it on my show the other day. Scott Mason did a fantastic job, deep dive on Play Like a Jet podcast, where he chronicles this from Glenn's journey as a player all the way up to the Lions DC and a Jets candidate, and takes you through all of this with his name escapes me right now, but he had a writer on who's, written a book on the history of the Lions, and he lives in Detroit. He's been a Lions fan. He covers the Lions. So they chronicled, Aaron Glenn's whole journey. And to me, he's a guy, he brings what the Jets need. Like, they need a disciplinarian. I don't mean like, it's funny because I say I want a disciplinarian, but then when the name Brian Flores came up, I cringed. And people like, no, we need that. We need a no nonsense guy. I was like, look, there's no nonsense. And then there's just maniac. They don't need him. They don't need someone who's trying to, antagonize his players and sort of alienate them if he doesn't like them. That's not what they need. They need a guy who can connect with the players, but who can also hold the players accountable. And that's what you're getting with Aaron Glenn. You saw it in Detroit. We've not seen it in years with the Jets. Robert Saleh, listen, I think Robert Saleh might be the nicest guy that the Jets have hired as a coach in a very long time, just a good person, but he lacked that willingness to get in guys' faces and correct them, which, again, doesn't have to be always, but every now and then send a message, and you just never saw that with him. I don't think that'll be the case with Aaron Glenn. I think you'll get a guy who, because of his connection with Parcells, because Parcells was his mentor, if you saw Parcells, Parcells would take over offensive play calling. He was a defensive coach, but he would do it all.
Right.
And Aaron Glenn has spoken to that and said, like, I understand I got to watch both sides of the ball, which is another thing the Jets have been missing at head coach for a very long time. Mangini probably better than anyone else they've had at that in a while. But again, Parcells was the true master of it. when he was with the Jets. So you're getting a guy who's going to be more aware of both sides of the ball than anyone they've had since Parcells. You're getting a guy who's worked every level. You're getting a guy who's that disciplinarian that they need, but again, who can also speak to the players respectfully, but send a message. I think Parcells made a comment similar to that actually when the hire happened. He said, he's not confrontational or disrespectful, but Aaron Glenn's not afraid to tell players what they have to hear. And I think he brings a lot of what they need. And him being an alumni former Jet is just a little cherry on top, right? Like what fan base doesn't root for one of their legends to come back and turn their team around when they're experiencing something like, for example, a 14-year playoff drought?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the beauty of this whole thing, right? Kind of segueing how you ended off there. When Aaron Glenn was drafted by the Jets, it was 94. It was Pete Carroll's first year. And there were high expectations there. Bruce Cosley was just let go. He was with the Jets since 1990. Prolific offensive coordinator coming from the Bengals. 1988 Super Bowl appearance against the Niners. And that didn't go so well. But there was a young kid there that kind of learned under Bud Grant back with the Minnesota Vikings in Pete Carroll. Everything looked great. Aaron Glenn got brought into there, and 94 was kind of like, all right, you know what? We might make that step up from 93 because we started pretty well in 93. Then we kind of fizzled. And 94, it had its ups, it had its downs. And then the fake spike happened. And that was on Glenn. And you could only imagine with a young player like that, it could destroy their career. But it showcased his resiliency, because then the following year, brand new coach, Leon Hess wanted to rewind time and go back into the 80s with a prolific offense. That's why, I get it that we all wanted the next best thing at offense. I get it, like a Ben Johnson. But sometimes it just doesn't work out. Coach had one of the two worst years as a Jet fan and the organization that Glenn went through. Again, 3-13, 1-15. There was no pride as a Jet fan. Imagine what that locker room was. And then to see Glenn learn the following year what it takes to get the same group of players and garner 8 more wins and a game shy of the playoffs. That's where I wanted to pick your brain on. What do you think that he took out of the most with that experience there? And then seeing what the Detroit Lions, that turnaround. Again, don't we forget how bad the Lions were? They were worse than the Jets. How do you kind of encapsulate everything with that?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me, or that I hope is the big takeaway for Aaron Glenn, is that now he has seen it from both perspectives. He has seen it as a player and a coach, but he knows firsthand, there's nobody who knows better that you can turn things around with quality coaching.
Yes.
This is an example I used a million times. Really, I brought it up during the season when, there were these Jets fans were having these internal wars about who's to blame for this season, Saleh or Joe Douglas, and who needs to be fired. And I just kept going back to the Parcells Jets, where he took over for a team that went 1-15 the year before. And in year one, he goes 9-7. And his defense, or his offense rather, goes from they were 29th or 30th, bottom 3 or 4. And they went from bottom 3 or 4 to middle of the pack in 1 year with one change on offense. They changed one offensive lineman out. They had the same quarterback, running back, receivers, center, tackles. I believe they changed a guard. I believe it was Lonnie Palele, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Everything, nothing else changed.
Right.
Tight ends, receivers, every single piece on offense was exactly the same, minus one lineman. And that unit, because the coaching went from Rich Kotite to Bill Parcells, went from one of the worst in the NFL to a very respectable sort of middle of the pack. You saw this escalation in very short order. And then, within a couple of years of Parcells getting there, this team is a couple of minutes away from the Super Bowl. Who the hell knows what happens if that second half kickoff in the Denver game, if the wind doesn't knock it down and gift the ball back to the Broncos. And, years ago, if you remember the old Jets player Marvin Washington, I interviewed him about that game. And he talked about how, the players just couldn't believe it. It was like, how did this just happen? Nobody's expecting a second half kickoff and the football gods just pluck the ball out of the air and hand it back to the kicking team.
Surreal.
It was soul crushing, and if not
Yes.
for that, I think that was probably the turning point in that game. But that's what they did. They went from 1-15 to having a lead at halftime in the AFC Championship game in a couple of years. And then now, Aaron Glenn lives that as a player. And now as a coach with the Lions, again, the Lions sort of a bottom of the barrel team along with the Jets for much of the last couple of decades. And insert Dan Campbell. Now, granted, they had massive overhaul in personnel. But you listen, if you don't have enough talent, you have to bring it in. And that was the argument with the Jets last year, right? And it wasn't just Jets fans. It was pundits from whether it was bloggers, podcasters, NFL Network. Universally, everyone in their right mind agreed, like, this team's got a lot of talent. This team this team can be special. And that's even before you added Devontae Adams. Right. So the talent is there for Aaron Glenn to come in and turn this thing around quickly. But while that's, I guess, you can't deny that's a possibility. Me personally, to me, this team has found so many different ways to screw it up that I'm anticipating the worst at every point. And if they turn around and surprise us and win some games, fantastic. But that I would hope is a huge takeaway for Aaron Glenn. He's got the credibility, he's got the credentials to stand in front of that locker room and say, I've been in your shoes and I've turned it around. I've done it as a player and I've done it as a coach. Here's how you do it, and start that journey.
That's the intangibles, right, that he brings to the table. And kind of like what so many fans wanted, again, a straight up offensive coordinator, no defensive coordinators. What I wanted the most, and I think the majority of Jet fans wanted as well, but they're kind of afraid to say it, is that they wanted a head coach. They wanted a coach that is going to mingle into the offensive meetings. They wanted the offensive coordinators and the defensive coordinators to go through him. Just like you had said with Parcells. He would take over offensive play calls. That's a head coach. That's the chief right there. And I think Aaron Glenn has learned that. And you could tell the passion that he has, but he also keeps players to a certain point. There's an assertiveness about him. Yes, he might be called a player's coach, but he's going to hold everyone accountable, even the coaches. That's why I think right now with filling that staff, he's trying to get the best one possible to extrapolate as much talent as possible on this team. Because let's not forget that this is no pushover talent team. It's full of talent. So if you get Wilkes in here as a defensive coordinator, I think he balled out. He did great with San Francisco. I mean, leading up to the Super Bowl. And then now possibly you want to think of, I don't know, innovator as an offensive coordinator, Nick Caley. I'm hoping that we can snag him because now with Cohen being the head coach of the Jaguars, he might grab him before we do. I feel like the Jets have to act quick, but also it's got to be right. It's got to be, because we're just trying to set this tone in the locker room of culture. It definitely starts with the assistant coaches.
Yeah, I would love to see, I think what I like most about what I'm seeing with the rumors that are floating around right now, because, Nick Caley, you love the fact that he comes from that tree, from the McVay tree, right? But, my whole thing is I'm trying to stay level-headed with all of this right now, because no matter what tree he comes from, doesn't mean he's going to be good, right? How many of Bill Parcells or Bill Belichick's coaches have gone on to be great? Look at Eric Bieniemy. For years, he was like, why can't he get a head coaching job? Why can't he get and then he says, you know what? I'm going to leave and prove I can do this without Andy Reid.
Right.
And within 2 years, he can't keep a college job. You know what I mean? So there's these guys that they're on these trees, and it's like, okay, that's great, but who's the roots? Like, that's the head coach. That's Andy Reid. That's Bill Parcells. That's Bill Belichick. So I'm not saying I'm not knocking the guy. I'm just saying I'm sort of pumping the brakes. Like, from what I've read and what's out there, I would like it. I would like it a lot more if the thing that I'm hearing that I'm liking most is that Aaron Glenn is thinking about bringing in a veteran guy as sort of an offensive consultant in addition to that. Because, and this is what I said on my show many times, this is why the reason I preferred an offensive guy. And you're right, because, I've said in years past, Just get a good coach. I don't care if it's offense or defense. And there's years where I say, get an offensive guy, and they don't go that way. And I'm like, okay, fine. As long as the coach is good, I don't care. But I'm kind of at a point now where I'm like, at some point in my life, they have to develop a quarterback.
Right.
And if they're going to do that, I like their chances better if the guy at the head of the table is an offensive guy. You know,
Right.
listen, with any quarterback, and especially figuring it's probably going to be a rookie OC, you know, my thought process was, if it's going to be a quarterback you're drafting and a rookie offensive coordinator, there's going to be hiccups, there's going to be bumps, there's going to be times they might need a veteran voice to say, oh, yes, we ran into this one time when I was with this team. I saw this with this quarterback. Here's how we fixed that problem. Like, I wanted another problem solver in the room who's done it.
Yes.
And I felt like if you bring in a rookie OC and a defensive coach, you're not getting that. But now the talk is that Aaron Glenn is going to bring in an offensive veteran on the staff. It's like, oh, well, that changes everything, because that's all I wanted. I just want another voice in the room who's been there, done that, and can provide guidance. So that kind of fills that checks that box for me. And it's like, great, that's what I wanted. I wanted an experienced voice who's been there and done it. And it sounds like Aaron Glenn wants to do just that. I don't know that just the fact he's exploring it tells me I don't see that it's something he would explore and then not do if he doesn't get his guy. Like, go get somebody who can do that, who can fill that role. And once you've done that, you now give that young quarterback, whoever it's going to be, whether it's going to be Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe or Curtis Rourke, whatever rookie, you're not taking one in round one. I don't see this team trading a bunch of assets to move up in the top two. And if you're in the top two and you need a quarterback, why would you? But anyway, that's a whole different conversation. But I think we will see them at a quarterback at some point, and the fact that they'll have a veteran in the room is exciting. And yeah, but some of these young coordinator names that we're hearing, some of them are pretty interesting. But until we see them do it, it's purely speculation, I guess, at this point.
Yes, exactly. And we could get to like that fantasy land kind of aspect, and that's where I want kind of to peg, because you have a young rookie head coach, and you kind of want him to be surrounded with veteran coaches. What do you think of this? Like, again, let's say they go Clint Kubiak, but as a quarterback coach, what about a Doug Peterson? I don't know if he's going to get another head coaching opportunity, which I don't think so. I think they're almost all filled up. Offensive coordinator, I don't know if teams are going to go this route, but someone who's been there, just like you had said, as a Super Bowl winning head coach, but a quarterback coach, someone that can be the middleman to a rookie head coach and a rookie offensive coordinator, that they can kind of throw ideas at him, and maybe have a Mike Westhoff as a consultant, probably just to start it off, like maybe training camp. And then obviously, because of health concerns, he would probably drive into the sunset. I get it. But again, having someone like Steve Wilkes, who has been there also as another head coach, I think when it's all said and done, and I get it, it's all speculation, I think the coaching staff that is going to be assembled is going to be very similar to what Parcells had, in which it's going to be very up and coming. And especially with the GM, we're going to get into that right now with, again, is Darren Mogi the GM of the Jets? We don't know, but all signs point to him. But at the end of the day, I think probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to have a very veteran offensive and defensive special team staff. Is there any name out there that you're thinking, defensive coordinator wise, offensive coordinator wise, that you would love the Jets to explore and possibly hire?
Well, I think the Wilkes name, is the hot one connected with the team. And again, another good choice in my mind, because we've seen in years past where we've had a young Jets coach without another former head coach on that staff. And I feel like that helps, like when Todd Bowles had Chan Gailey, and it's not to say this team did a bunch of great things under them, but it had to be useful to Bowles to have Gailey, in his ear, to just say in a meeting, have you thought about this? You'll want to consider that, like just things you haven't seen or dealt with before firsthand. And a guy, again, get me a veteran guy who's had the experience, who's had success, and has served in a variety of roles up to head coach. And that's why I was excited to see the name, to see Wilkes connected with this team on the defensive side. And I think, depending on whose reports you're following, it does sound as if people are pretty bullish on this happening. I'm not going to say it's a lock, but people seem pretty comfortable saying he's Aaron Glenn's top choice. And I haven't seen his name mentioned as a a target anywhere else. So I don't see him as being someone to lose out on. But as far as the offensive side, Kubiak was an interesting name, just in terms of the pedigree, the experience. Again, having guys who have held that position before. And when you get these guys who grew up in football families, like whose dads are coaches and they've sort of always lived it, that level of experience is not easy to come by. So either one of those guys, joining the staff in some capacity. But I do like your point about the mix that it will be, and I think that's what you want on a staff, right? You want some guys who have seen it and done it, but you also want some guys with high ceilings who you think these high football IQ guys who can develop into good coaches down the road and give yourself a pipeline, if you will, like of some guys who are ready to take up more responsibility, but have had the time with that with a full staff, have had that time to learn from some of the older coaches and just sort of everybody make each other better.
See, that's the thing. Like on this defense, I think we forgot how good it is. But I just feel like there weren't certain coaches there that were coaching them out to that ability. Like Sauce, we saw an enormous decline. Let's be honest, a huge decline this season. We're looking at it. We're like, were we fooled? Was it fool's gold? Was Stingley really that much better? For that explains it. That's why he was selected ahead of him with the Texans. But then you start looking at the disarray of what occurred this past season. We were at 2-3, Monday night for first place. And that was the first crack of the divide in the locker room, in which before that game, you had so many defensive players saying, I'll always have Salah's back. I'll always have his back. And at that point, everything just took a nosedive. Rodgers wasn't helping either. He was trying, but his mannerisms on the field, even as a fan, you're looking at that. He throws it at guys' feet. There's no coach there to kind of like shake him up, say, hey, look, we're trying to win a game here, limited time. There was no leader on the coaching staff. Even Hackett had that relationship with Rodgers, but he's all the way up there. He just couldn't wait to get the hell out of here. And once everything crumbled, now we have a defensive-minded head coach, but I look at him as an overall, where he's going to expect the offensive side of the ball, Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, list goes on, to up their game in order to get to that level of this new pedigree. It's that culture. I think that's the biggest thing this offseason was to get the right coach to change that stench. There was no culture there. It was a culture of defeat, of demise, of negativity, of no one knows what the hell anyone is doing there. They got the real deal there. And that's what I wanted to ask you. What do you expect out of Quinnen Williams, out of Sauce Gardner, JJ coming back, Will McDonald, and maybe 7th overall, we might get the pass rusher from Penn State. His name slips my mind. If he falls, which I don't think, but you never know.
Carter, yeah, he won't. I can't see him falling to 7. I know what you're getting to, though.
What do you think?
Yeah, and listen, it could be Mason Graham, right? The DT from Michigan to play alongside Quinnen Williams. Abdul Carter, the linebacker from Penn State. Mm-hmm. These guys are all options if they fall to 7. But I think, and I touched on this on my show earlier today, and it may have been yesterday, I forget, one of the last couple days. I know fans don't want to hear it, and it upsets people, but you have to remember sometimes at the end of the day, these players are human beings, right? And you touched on it. What you said was perfect, because it was almost, I don't want to say alarming, but I was so surprised. I've been watching for 36, 7 years, whatever it is. I've never heard a player say what Sauce Gardner said when Robert Saleh was fired. I've never heard a player say, this season we're playing for the guy that just got fired.
Crazy.
I was like, and I'm imagine you're Woody Johnson.
Yeah.
Like, you've just announced to the world that this guy isn't good enough to be your team's head coach anymore. And one of the faces of your franchise is like, I'm playing for him. That was, I've never heard that before. I've seen guys upset. I've seen guys say, I'm sorry it happened. We failed. We're the reason he got fired. All that. I get that. I've never seen a guy dedicate the rest of the season to the guy who just got fired. That was wild. But I think that goes to show how much they did love Robert Saleh. And here's the human part of it where I get fans don't want to hear it. The examples I used earlier were every fan would love it if every guy on their team gave effort the way Ray Lewis or JJ Watt did. Like those guys are the standard. Doesn't matter what your record is, doesn't matter what the score is. They're 100% every single play. But that's not reality. And I really think the Saleh firing, I think guys like Sauce, guys like DJ Reed, Quinnen Williams, we saw their performance slip so significantly that, at the time I'm like, oh, it's a slump. But then you think about it and you're like, maybe they, by the time you're, at 2-3, you're like, we'll see. By the time you're 2-5, 6, your season's over.
Right.
So it's like, here we go again. We're not even at the halfway mark. The guy we love so much is out the door. We're not going to the playoffs again. I think the effort wasn't there. And I think if you re-energize the building, you bring in an Aaron Glenn who gets in front of these guys and inspires them, add a couple more pieces, you get these guys playing hard again. One of the most interesting things about the Aaron Glenn hiring to me was the fact DJ Reed commented on Twitter.
Where'd that
in
come
my mind,
from?
DJ Reed's gone.
Right.
He said himself, like, I'm looking forward to my next opportunity.
Wow. Yep.
The fact that he's saying he's fired up, I'm like, I can't help but have the thought, does he want to come back now? Which I would welcome, even though they, it did look like maybe he was not playing at full speed when he knew the season was over. But financially, I don't know how they can make it work because he ain't going to be cheap. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think guys like Quinnen, guys like JJ, so even Sauce, he had that slump. The tackling looked really bad for a good 4 or 5 week stretch, but he cleaned it up. He wasn't himself, but he was much better at the tail end of the season. Had a couple of big time performances that were more reminiscent of his first couple seasons than they were most of last year. So I think we'll see a lot of these guys sort of turn it around and play well again, play at a very high level. But again, if they're 2-7, I don't know that they won't drop off again. But how about don't get to 2-7? How about stay in the playoff hunt, give these guys something to play for, and let them play to their full potential under a defensive-minded coach, and hopefully, depending on who your quarterback is, hopefully you're winning some football games.
Well, that's the next one. So as far as quarterback, right? Yes, we haven't right now hired our next GM. I mean, all fingers are pointing to Darren Mogi. And I got to be honest, I do like that. I like that we're going young at the GM. It reminds me of like the Red Sox with Theo Epstein. Like, who's this guy? He's young. He doesn't know much. He's up and coming, but he's going to get eaten up. But I like the direction where, as much as so many fans are against Woody, but if he does something like this, and the guy that I liked more was Hallaby, the assistant GM for the Eagles, their minds are out of the box thinking. And that's what the Jets need as well. I get it that we all wanted an up and coming offensive coordinator, and maybe that's still on the table. But from a GM point of view, work alongside a spunky head coach that has it all together, that's ready to take that next step. And I think that would be a perfect marriage, man. To finally have that all kind of wrapped up into one. What are your thoughts on the possibility of getting Mogi as GM?
Well, again, back to the same with the OC thing, right? We wouldn't know what to expect because we don't know what he's done. But if you look at his resume, it's incredibly impressive to see how fast he has worked through the ranks there. Mm-hmm. I always think it's impressive when a guy manages to not only advance as fast as he did, but do it under multiple bosses, multiple regimes, because that means he's doing enough to impress people who have no loyalty to him. It's not like, oh, this is a guy you've worked with for 5 years and you've got a friendship now, so maybe he doesn't see your flaws, and Patton comes in, and Patton, the Broncos have basically been rescued by Sean Payton. I mean, they had, between hiring Hackett and eating all that money on Russ, like they were on thin ice. Yep. They bring Payton in, and he kind of has fixed everything. But look, from the few things you can find on him, on Mogi, it's concerning that he was pro Hackett in Denver. But you see also at the same time he was pro Kevin O'Connell, who was his college roommate. They both played quarterback at San Diego State. And yeah, the fact that he was able to go from a scouting intern all the way up to assistant GM, and really, I think other than area scout where he worked for 4 years, every position he had with the Broncos was 1 to 2 years, and then he just kept moving up the ladder consistently. Again, Patton comes in. Patton said he watched him work at the Senior Bowl and said, this guy's impressive. This guy's going to get stolen off our staff if we don't sweeten the pot and give him a nicer deal. So he makes him the assistant GM, where he has apparently been a part of all of their decision making. But as I said, and look, no matter who they hire, no matter who it ends up being, we want to be as optimistic as possible, but we also have to be honest and realize that for as much as we can say, and the example I give, as painful as it is to even relive that nightmare, is that what were we saying when the Jets got John Idzik? Oh, look at all these superstar players that the Seahawks find on day 3. We now have a guy who knows that formula. That's a Super Bowl winning team over there, and we just got one of their execs, and they get Richard Sherman in the 4th round. They get Russ Wilson, franchise quarterback, and now he's ours. We got a guy. Well, how'd that, Mike McCagnon. All I read about Mike McCagnon was that his tireless work effort and copious note-taking, and all the other scouts admired his ability to sit and, he would try to isolate himself and just watch practices for hours at a time and take notes. How'd that work out? Right. So everything is rosy and great. And I'm not even trying to put a damper on it. I'm just trying to sort of remind myself, like, when someone gets hired, you're going to hear wonderful things about them, because who are they asking? They're friends. They're asking their buddies. I said earlier, you never see Ian Rappaport come on McAfee and say, the new GM out of wherever, I'm told he's a complete moron. Don't trust anything he does. And there's no way this is going to work out.
Sure.
It's always up and coming, rising star, very impressive, professional, relates to the players. Everyone in the building loves him. It's all that. And that's what it'll be with whoever they hire. And that's fine. And I hope like hell it works out, obviously. And there have been some good, I looked at their draft history since Mogi was elevated to the, he went from, I think he was pro personnel. Then he oversaw the whole operation, college and pro personnel. So he was the head guy under the GM, overseeing both sides of the house, in terms of pro and college. And the drafts from that point, there was some good, but there was a lot of not very good. There was a lot of guys who were out of the league in a couple years, but most of those guys were day 3 picks, and people get obsessed with, why don't we have hits on day 3? Look at Puka Nacua. Look at right. Like, there's always 2 or 3 guys every year who you get on day 3, like league wide, who are really good players, and fans forget the other 90 guys that didn't work out, and they focus on the 2 guys that did, and say, look, it's not that hard. Why can't we do that?
It's great that you bring those points up, because I was just thinking, all right, the same narrative that we kind of have for Aaron Glenn, to be surrounded by veteran coaches, then I start thinking, all right, you know what? With all of these interviews that we've had, is there room for, let's say, football ops, whatever the points are, maybe to keep Phil Savage, maybe to hire Thomas Dimitroff in some capacity, and also at the top height, maybe snag Chris Spielman as well, and just a full revamp from the inside out, from the top down, because it can't just be 2 people, in my opinion. It can't just be GM, head coach, figure it out. I think there has to be more behind this, because if you think about it, the 33rd team, they interviewed. I think they took a NASA shuttle and went to different planets and brought them here and then shipped them right back. I think there was a reason behind that, and maybe we didn't understand it then. But I think the Jets are trying to clean house deep, because I think this is really bad. They call Washington the swamp. The Jets is the mudlands of mudlands. It's horrendous. I think there's a plan. This is, again, pure speculation, but there's got to be a reason why there was so many interviews. And again, the 33rd team is trying to up their brand. And if they do it with the Jets, they already did it with Washington. They're in the NFC Championship game. Wow. They do it with the Jets, Glenn. They're going to be the only entity that teams are going to call and say, find me the next GM, next head coach, and whoever you want to interview to clean house and make our franchise, dare I say, like the New York Jets. Do you think that this is probably where we're going?
There have been whispers, right? That I think Rich Cimini touched on it today, that maybe one of these guys they brought in stays behind, and I think I've said a couple times that I like the idea of Phil Savage staying on. He's still been working, since Joe Douglas was let go. He's the guy making these bottom of the roster moves, which just shows he's invested and he's trying to
Right.
do his job, whether it's an interim, whatever, or a full-time gig, which it certainly appears it won't be.
Mhm.
But the Jets are working players right now, draft prospects, and Phil Savage is part of that. So to me, he's kind of showed his commitment, his dedication. He's been a GM. I would like for Phil Savage to stay on in an elevated role. On the you want to avoid too many cooks in the kitchen. In my mind, you don't want to bring in 8 new guys to run the show.
Mhm.
But I do like the idea of somebody to oversee the whole operation, which could be Spielman, because again he's been doing that for a few years now with the Lions. Just kind of took on this role that they created for him because they liked his vision. And he's been a big part of what they've done down there. So if you can bring somebody else on, the question becomes, who is it? Because look, a lot of these guys are ego driven. You know what I mean? If you listen, I don't know Thomas Dimitrov. He's the guy I wanted as GM because he's experienced. He's built a winner. We know he can do it. And look, this is speculation on my part. But what happens if you bring a guy like that in, and maybe he does miss being a GM and he kind of nudges a little too hard when he wants something done?
Mm.
We should be doing this and not that. Like, are you running the risk of creating more conflict by having guys in a role assisting a guy in a role that used to be yours that you miss doing? So I like the idea of it. I guess it's just so important. Like, the more people you add, the more important is you get it right, because
Right.
you can't have too many egos in the building and people stepping on each other,
Mm.
and that just creates a whole level of drama that is completely avoidable by just not creating those positions. But the idea of one, a football czar or whatever you want to call it, I could live with that. But at the same, I mean, we saw Parcells try it in Miami, didn't work
Mhm.
out. I think people forget. I think Tannenbaum did that for the Dolphins for a couple of years. And that bomb there was, I think, years ago. Didn't the Browns bring in Mike Holmgren to do it in that role?
They
And
did.
that failed miserably. So it often fails, but I guess I feel like if you can add as many levels as possible between Woody and the coach, and Jaime and Woody and the coach, like, get as many football people involved in the process that can maybe get in the way of, and whatever Brick Johnson's role is going to be, like, get as many football men in the building as possible to avoid situations where you have non-football people impacting the decision making.
Right. No, that great point on that. And that's where I wanted to kind of lean on Aaron Rodgers here, because now if you have someone who has that veteran pedigree, 20 years plus in the league, I've done that, done this, been there alongside with Devontae Adams, which again, they complement each other very well. But now, kind of bringing this full circle, if he comes back, how is Aaron Glenn going to handle that? He's trying to kind of etch his way into this Jets organization and make it his own. And if he calls a play or sends it in and he agrees with the offensive coordinator, and Aaron Glenn changes the play, because again, let's be real, Aaron Rodgers has been running the show with the Jets the past 2 years. He wants coaches, he gets them. He needs players, boom. That can't fly anymore. Now, how do you think that dynamic might work in the event? Again, let's say they sit down and Aaron Glenn is like, look, we're going to do things my way here. I work my butt off. Now, you can't overrule me on this. There's going to be some trust here. It's a give and take relationship, but your mannerisms have to change too. You can't be throwing an out route or that yellow route, what red line, whatever the case is, and then call out your own teammate on air. I don't want that. We're trying to change the culture here. Do you think that there may be certain ultimatums? That's what I'm trying to say. If you want to come back here, you have to abide by what we're trying to build here.
Yeah, I think, whoever the coach or GM was going to be at the start of this process, I think we kind of understood if Rodgers is going to come back, they're going to have that conversation, because there's basically, you've got a Hall of Fame quarterback with a big ego who likes to do things his way. But I think the thing that might force, and again, what'll force Aaron Rodgers, in my mind, to have to maybe capitulate or not even that, just to be more willing to listen than maybe he's, it's rumored than he's willing to. Um, Aaron Glenn will kind of have it easy in that he knows he's going to outlast Aaron Rodgers here.
Right.
Aaron Rodgers isn't here for 4 more seasons, and you're not firing Aaron Glenn after 1 year because of Aaron Rodgers. If one of them has to go, Rodgers is the one that would go. And Rodgers wants to play. He has said he wants to play. Now he could change his mind between now and the season, but I think he'll want to come back for another year. And I think the Jets might be his only suitor. So he's going to have to kind of say, all right, if I want to play another year, and look, we've said it. Aaron Rodgers marched to the beat of his own drum. He could absolutely say, you know what, I want to play, but I'm not going to. Take care. He might do that.
Right.
But if he does want to play, he's going to have to, come to an agreement with Aaron Glenn, whatever the setup is going to be in terms of the power structure. I think it's easy for Aaron Glenn to claim it because he's got a backbone. I think, as much as I like Robert Saleh, the person, I thought he was too obsessed with friendships and relationships. I think he wanted to be everybody's buddy. I think Aaron Glenn will be your buddy, but he's also happy to not be your buddy.
Right.
So I think it'll be easier for him to say, to draw the line in the sand and say, here's what needs to happen if you're going to come back. I think whatever he lays out, Aaron Rodgers will agree to. I think he will come back. To me, he kind of, from a Jets perspective, you have to try to get him back because what's your other option?
Right.
And I've said before, unless this head coach, this new GM, and Woody Johnson, unless they've all sat down and said, listen, we're comfortable extending this playoff drought a couple more years, so we're going to let Aaron walk. You don't let Aaron walk.
Mm-hmm.
Because people say, go to Tyrod Taylor. When was the last time he played more than 6 games in a season? And I like Tyrod, but he doesn't stay healthy.
Right.
Okay, great. Tyrod Taylor. Then who's your starter beyond week 5 for the rest of the year? If you're trying to make the playoffs, if that is, in fact, the goal. So if they want to win, you kind of have to bring him back. If Rodgers wants to be back, he's going to have to agree to whatever basically, I think he comes back, but I think where it gets interesting is during the down when things aren't going well. If the team is struggling, if they start, let's say they start off 5-2 and then they lose 3 or 4 in a row, then what is Aaron Rodgers less willing? If there's a moment where he wants to do something, they say, no, we want to do this. And he feels like, our season is slipping away. I'm going to do what I know works. That's where you could have some problems. And listen, God forbid the Jets are in a situation where they have a big moment that could impact their season, where they're trying to make the playoffs, because it's been a long time since they've had that beyond sort of week 2. So I hope there are some high stakes moments this upcoming season because there's something meaningful on the line. But when there is, or leading up to that point of getting Rodgers back in the building, I think Glenn will lay out the expectations. Rodgers will have to agree to them, and then they try to navigate the season through the ups and downs and stay loyal to what they're both, saying they can do for each other.
Right. Like in a perfect world, if you think about it, Aaron Rodgers comes back and you draft a young quarterback. And yes, we do have Jordan Travis. No one knows anything about him. If he's 100% healthy, whatever the case is, the rookie from Penn State now entering year 2. The beauty of bringing Aaron Rodgers back, my positive on that is that it won't force Woody Johnson to play a rookie quarterback because Woody loves throwing them out to the wolves. Again, all the way from Mark Sanchez, Geno, Sam, and then most recently, Zach. If you get someone like Jackson Dart or Ewers, and you have them just sit and learn behind Aaron. And again, Jordan Travis would be year 2, just trying to soak everything up. At least there'll be some sort of plan for the immediate future, as opposed to, all right, let's tank. That's what everybody wants to do now. I don't know if you went into this vortex yet. So many Jet fans want to just tank this season and get Archie Manning. I mean, if Archie's uncle, Eli, didn't want to go to the Chargers, I highly doubt. Well, hopefully, again, at that point, the Jets have the groundwork down, foundation, everything's good, and the locker room culture perfect. And again, if we're first overall in 2026, then damn, right? It must have been a really bad season. But with that being said, if Aaron comes back and the culture is right, and we're at a 9-game, 10-game winning game season, to me, that's a success for trying to change this nasty culture of losing for the past 15 plus years. At what point will we look at this overall totality and say, you know what? We need Aaron Rodgers. We need him. There's no other option. Now, I wanted to touch on something. What if? These are the lives of what ifs. Would you give up your 7th overall pick if the new GM and Aaron Glenn are completely sold on the possibility of landing JJ McCarthy?
Yeah, it would depend on their evaluation. If they believe he's worth it, then fine, pull the trigger. There are people, I've heard several people say that JJ McCarthy would be QB1 in this class. And I'm a big Cam Ward guy. Been a big Cam Ward guy for 3 years now when I started watching him in college. So I loved the idea of him being a Jet when it looked like they might have a top 1 or 2 pick. It was like, all right, at least they're going to get my favorite quarterback in the class. But obviously they end up at 7, so they're not going to get him. So yeah, look, if they're evaluators, you bring in your new GM and you talk to your scouts, and if they feel like, yes, JJ McCarthy was QB1, let's go get him, then yeah, then do it. If pick 7 will get it done. But I think maybe it's going to depend on what Minnesota does. There are people who think they're going to let Darnold walk. So if Darnold goes, maybe it's not maybe they're not. Obviously, they would have no interest in trading JJ McCarthy at that point. But if McCarthy were available and pick 7 would get it done, and this team believes he can be a franchise quarterback, then absolutely. Then make that move. And you also have the benefit of him not being that rookie that we've talked about. The number of rookies we've seen struggle. Granted, he was injured, so he didn't practice, but he got to spend a year with an accomplished, competent NFL coaching staff. A guy in O'Connell who, again, that's probably that plays a role in this. Now, if you bring in Moogie as the GM and O'Connell was his college roommate, and if Sam Darnold is coming back to Minnesota, kind of get some, you're probably more likely to get some honest answers out of him about what they think McCarthy can be. And so, yeah, I've talked on my show recently about the possibility of going and getting McCarthy for that very reason. I can't remember if we discussed it. Minnesota picks pretty late. If you could do a pick swap and then add another pick on top of that, so you're still getting a 1 at the back end of round 1, obviously that'd be even more preferable. So if you could work something like that, then I'd be all for it. But now that you can afford to bring him back because he's on the rookie deal. You keep Rodgers. You have him work behind Rodgers and Rodgers mentor him. I don't know if you can do that. I think the fact he's got a year under his belt, even though it's only in a look but don't touch capacity. I think that becomes another interesting question. I'd be happy either way. I'd be happy with a year of mentoring, and I'd be happy with them saying he's got a year. And as you mentioned, Jordan Travis too, right? Like let's not forget him. He was a very exciting player at FSU. He had the terrible injury. He was a guy I mocked him to the Jets several times because I was a big fan of his, and I felt like he would be a good developmental guy to bring on. So there will be some other options, but in terms of setting yourselves up to succeed this year, it's got to be a Rodgers, or if you believe McCarthy can be that guy, and you go get McCarthy.
Now, the Vikings do draft 24. So in that scenario, we would swap 7 to 24 and get them. Yep. Now, you brought up a very interesting name here. And I brought up Tankathon, the draft order, on purpose because of that number 2 overall. I got to make it clear. I do like Shedeur Sanders, but I don't like the baggage. I don't. Again, you're not just drafting his abilities, his amazing traits, but you're also drafting his dad. So you're drafting so much more, and it's not only New York; it's the New York Jets, and it's a circus already to begin with. We're trying to get away from that. Now, let's say hypothetically, Tennessee goes Sanders. Cleveland has a quarterback. Unfortunately, he's out this year with another ruptured Achilles tendon. Who's to say maybe Cleveland is looking forward to the 2026 draft class? If the Jets are like, you know what? Cam Ward is the guy. What would you trade in order to get to the second overall? Because we've seen this huge turnaround with the Washington Commanders. Nobody in their right mind, nobody, even the Vegas odds, had the Commanders in the NFC Championship game with a rookie from LSU. Nobody. And he changed it around. And let me say, Dan Quinn, the head coach of Washington, nobody wanted. I got to raise my hand. Let's say if I was in that scenario and I was a Commanders fan and I hear the word Dan Quinn, I'm grabbing my head. I'm like, I wish we could have gone a different route. But it's amazing what the coordinators around him can do and what they did in order to level up someone like Jaden Daniels. What would you do? I mean, out of all the quarterbacks in this draft, gotta agree, Cam Ward is very special.
Yeah, like I said, Cam Ward is a guy that I've sort of, sent out some tweets about him when I was watching him in college 2-3 years ago. Felt like he could be the total package. Talk about a guy who just the poise, the calm under pressure. He's got the arm strength. He's got the ability to make big time throws on the move. He can work you underneath. He can do a variety of things, and I think he's sort of, even as a guy who was looking very much forward to watching him this year, he even exceeded my expectations, and I expected really good things out of him. So would I give up 7 and then, a future, maybe do you do a conditional pick next year, a conditional 1 or a 2, depending on his performance, something like that? Because I think the thing this year, to sort of keep it realistic, I think that with a team that, like, the big thing with the Jets right now to me is that the offensive line for the most part is in place. Like, does Morgan Moses come back? We don't know. But I think you kind of try to get Moses back and add a rookie to compete with him, because you're set at left tackle with Olu. You're set at guard. I mean, Simpson, another guy who exceeded expectations this year. And then Tippmann and AVT, a little dinged up this year, but he played, 15 games. So if you can duplicate that, you're fine. So the fact that you're strong up front, which is, as we always say, right, it starts up front. If you feel like you're going to be competitive, then I don't think this team with a new general manager is going to walk in the door and say, let's give up 3 premium picks to move up and get a quarterback, and then we don't pick again until round 4 or something like that, or until our 3rd rounder with pick 90, whatever. So would I do it? Yeah. But do I think a new regime looking to add the final few pieces to a team? Because again, as we mentioned, this defense, right? Like, get a DT next to Quinnen Williams, like amazing. And this is, DT is a spot where this draft is particularly deep. You've got the first round guys, but you've got some 2nd, 3rd rounders as well, who I think would do well on this defensive line, because it is a strength when everybody's healthy. If you get JJ back, and we saw what Will McDonald did this year, and we know what Quinnen can do, you add another 1st rounder to that mix, or, even just a 2nd rounder, a DT, a Walter Nolan type, or a Deion Walker type, if his medicals check out, then I think this team can be competitive right away. So I don't know that they're going to say, yeah, let's offload a bunch of our premium picks to bring in a rookie quarterback. I think you'd be more likely to do it for a McCarthy, because he has at least been in an NFL program for a year and had the opportunity to see how things run, to see how a pro gets prepared, and watching Darnold work under O'Connell. So he's gained some valuable experience, even though it may not necessarily be taking snaps. But again, I can't say I'd hate if they traded for Cam Ward, because like I said, he was my favorite QB in this class. But I think maybe you go a little later, like, you mentioned Ewers. I said Jackson Dart. Some of these guys who might be there later in the draft, who have taken a ton of snaps in college, have won a bunch of games. They're not these sort of wet behind the ears rookies who played 1 year in college and had one good year of production. Jackson Dart started for a couple years. Ewers started for a few years, and in big time conferences against the best colleges and against the best defenses in college football in some cases. And they've beaten some of these teams. Ewers beat Alabama a couple years ago when nobody gave him a chance. These guys have played big time football for a couple of years. So I would expect them to go that route rather than the trade up route. But it's about trusting the new regime. And, if they come in their evaluations and they feel like it's worth making that move, I wouldn't be opposed to it, but I would be surprised if they did it.
See, I wanted to bring up a clip here. Speaking of evaluation, because I wanted to ask you a question, but I wanted to preface it with this here. Again, this is Aaron Glenn speaking with Mr. Clark here on his first encounter with Bill Parcells. Take a listen.
Really soon. But what you gonna do, AG, if somebody run into your office like you ran in Parcells' office and ask him if he was finna trade you?
Man, that was the dumbest thing ever.
What happened now?
Oh man,
they don't know the story, AG, man. You gotta tell
the
it.
story, man. So man, what was this? This was 97.
90 something.
It was 97. And so I'm hearing all these stories, Parcells like these 6 foot corners, he's 6'2", and hell, I ain't that, and I'm hearing all these, well, he's gonna trade you because you're not his type. So I keep hearing all these stories, but he wasn't telling me this, so I know my mentality and who I am, so I'm gonna try him. So I'm gonna go up there and ask him, man, if you're gonna trade me, then trade me, So he told me to shut that door, and I did. He said, have a seat. I sat there and he said, listen, everybody got a price on their head. Right? My own wife got a price on her head. If somebody was to offer me a good deal, then she gonna be gone. So if somebody offered me a good deal for you, you gonna be gone. I had to respect it.
Right.
I said, yes, sir, and walked on. That made sense to me.
Yeah.
If somebody offered me something for you, right, it's a good deal, man, you out.
So,
and man, that just opened my eyes to, man, this is a business.
right.
At first, man, I'm just playing. And I just started to realize, man, this is a true business now. Now, regardless of how I felt, like our relationship didn't change, but I understood exactly how the business was.
You're going to be a head coach.
See, I wanted to bring that up because to me, it's something extremely important. And us Jet fans, we fall in love with players right away. We buy the jerseys, posters. I don't know if they do posters anymore, like how I used to do it when I was a kid. But that is something extremely important, the lesson that he learned with Parcells. Now, when Parcells came here, he traded a pass rusher that we all loved, Hugh Douglas, 99.
Yep. At a Central State.
Central State. And he was a speed pass
Stud.
rusher. Loved him. Out of here. Out.
For peanuts.
For nothing.
4th round pick.
To the Eagles. He couldn't care less. You're out. You don't fit the mold. Now, as he said, everybody has a price. Now, if there are teams, let's say after the full evaluation with the GM, they're trying to change the face of this team. They're trying to mold it within their image and what they actually want. Long-term, immediate. I'm going to name a couple of players here, and you tell me if I know it's January, but is there a possibility to get something in return? Fan favorite, Sauce Gardner. Fan favorite, Quinnen Williams. Breece Hall entering the final years of his rookie contract, which I don't think we're going to explore the 5th year. And AVT. Do you feel out of those 1, 2, 3, 4 players that they might look at this and say, all right, you know what? We might get an extra 2nd rounder. We might get a 3rd rounder. We might get a conditional 1st, maybe next year. We don't know if they check off all the boxes and certain stipulations are met. Do you see this new regime looking at this entire roster and setting a certain group up here and say, yes, they're young. They have a lot of potential. But we can garner 3 players for this one, and this new one is not going to have that stench what we had before, or are they untouchable? What do you think?
Well, the one that I would say is least likely to get traded, 2 of them really in my mind. One is Sauce, for 2 reasons. One, I don't think his value would ever be lower. Coming off the year he just had, teams are going to lowball you on offers. Now, the interesting thing, though, and this was the first thing that popped into my mind, whoever the general manager is, Does he get a call from John Lynch who says, listen, my new defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh, is telling me to call you and see what it would take to get Sauce Gardner over here in San Francisco?
Wow.
Again, I'm not saying they will or should, but I think I think the Jets will get calls on Sauce, and I think that first call is going to be from San Francisco with Robert Saleh saying, go get me my guy. But again, I think the trade value, that might be the one team that's willing to give you the actual value because they understand what he brings and they can't play dumb and say, well, look at how we played last year. Yeah, but you're not trading for that guy. You're trading for the guy you had in year 1 and 2 under Robert Saleh. But I think because of Sauce's talent level and that his stock is lower than it should be, I don't think he goes anywhere. Quinnen Williams, you look at this, whether he had a down year or not, this defense with him versus without him is so night and day. That would be putting an enormous hole, just blowing a hole in the defense that you're not going to have. You may not be able to replace.
Right.
I think you do more harm than good if you move him. Now, Brees and AVT are the interesting ones, right? The running back. We've talked in recent years about, and I mean by we, I mean everyone has talked about how the devaluation of the running back position. But now this year, we're seeing what Baltimore did with Henry, what the Eagles did with Saquon. And yeah, you can say, well, Brees Hall's never even had a 1,000-yard season. Well, Brees Hall, he didn't have a 1,000-yard season last year because, the Jets being the Jets, someone lost count on the sidelines and they pulled him out at 996 in the final week of the season.
Unbelievable.
And then last year, he just didn't get the carries. Right. You look at his yards per carry after the Nate Hackett demotion, he was 4.5, 4.8 a week every single week. I think he had 1 week in the final 8 or 9 where he wasn't at least 4.5 a carry. He just wasn't getting the number of carries he needed because I think Rodgers just kept audibling to pass plays. So I think that hurt Brees. So I think teams know he's talented and he is entering his final year. So he's one guy I could see if there's a team that feels like they're a running back away, maybe they're willing to give up a premium pick for a premium running back. And AVT, I would hate to see that because I feel like if he stays healthy, you keep him on as a long-term piece to solidify that offensive line. But again, if there is another team out there that, anyone that didn't have him high on their board coming out of the draft is insane. So I think across the league, he's viewed as a very good young player. I think the only thing that might scare people, or the thing that would scare people off, obviously, is the injury history. So if out of those 4 guys, if one were to get dealt, I would imagine it would be Brees because he's the guy who could probably bring the most in return. Let me reword that. He's the guy they would be most willing to trade who would bring a good return because I don't think you're willing to move Sauce with his value right now. And I don't think you move Quinnen. But the name you left off, though, of course, is Garrett Wilson. What do you think of that?
I don't think he gets moved. There's no way. But
I think he wants to get moved. Is the thing will they honor it?
Right. Well, that's a big one because again, you hear whirlwind news and whatnot, and they're saying if Rodgers comes back, Garrett doesn't want to be there. And again, everything's contingent on what Aaron wants to do and what this new coaching staff wants to do and the GM. Would I honor that Garrett Wilson trade? I got to be honest, especially after what Parcells told Aaron Glenn. Who's the team? Number one. How high are they at the draft on the draft board? So that's why you brought up a great point with San Fran calling the Jets. Would you think, again, they're so close, right? They're so close to a Super Bowl. So to them, the 11th overall pick for Sauce Gardner could be a complete wash. It could be like, all right, you know what? I don't care as long as I have my number 1 cornerback. Now, to me, let's say Rodgers doesn't want to come back. That kind of sweetens the deal for Garrett to say, all right, you know what? They kind of listened to me that I really don't want him here. At that point, they have the armor right now. They have the 11th pick, the 7th overall, and I have to pop this in reverse now. If you have those 2 first-rounders and Cam Ward is there, 2nd overall, I think that's enough ammunition. We don't have to worry about next year's first or whatever the case is. Would you pull the trigger at that point? We're just
as
parlaying.
Much as I like Ward, 7 and 11 would be too much to move up. That's too rich. And again, as I said, my favorite QB in the class. I feel like if you're giving up 7 and 11, that's got to be like, I don't want to say Andrew Luck level prospect, but it's got to be. That's too much. Just for me, that's too much. But who knows? The first domino to fall, of course, would have to be getting that that 11th pick, and if it is a sauce. But the interesting one to me is Garrett, just because I can't remember exactly when. I feel like it was some point last season after one of their many losses, and I've pointed this out many times, and it gets people upset. But I'm just telling you what I'm seeing. Like I when he does his post games, Garrett Wilson, there's not another human being who seems unhappier to be losing. And I look at him and he looks so beaten down that I a year ago I said this guy's going to demand the trade, and now a couple months ago, Samini's like, hey, there's whispers this guy's going to demand the trade, and everyone's surprised and mad. What do you mean? And I'm like, have you not been watching this kid after the games? He looks like he wants to retire after every loss, let alone get traded. He looks like he doesn't want to play the game anymore.
Right.
So if you can't convince him, and that's where Aaron Glenn comes in, if Aaron Glenn can look this kid in the eye and convince him, hey, we're going to turn this thing around and we're going to pay you. Like, let's extend you now and you're going to be part of this thing. Whether Rodgers is here this year, this year or not, he will be gone after this season, and, we'll go from there. So you're going to have to sell him on a vision, but remember, he's a guy, you sold him on Zach Wilson, then you sold him on Aaron Rodgers. Is he going to buy a third one? You know what I mean? Or is he going to say, look, appreciate what you're saying, but I want to, and I know people say, oh, they have control, they don't have to trade. I get that they don't have to trade him, but we always see guys get traded who don't have to get traded, because teams don't want that distraction in the locker room. They don't want other players around the league to see, oh, that's how they treat their guys. Like, look, that guy's worked hard for them. He's produced. They suck. He wants out, and they're going to hold him hostage. It's a bad look in that sense. So I understand that. The number of people who've come back at me, dude, why would you even suggest that? They don't have to trade him. Right? They didn't have to trade Jamal Adams either. The Giants didn't have to trade Odell Beckham. You don't have to trade anybody, but sometimes a guy demands it, or look, we're not going to come into camp. We're going to make life miserable. They're not at that point yet. And maybe Aaron Glenn helps them avoid it, but he's the one name that, again, for over a year, as I see him on the verge of tears after these miserable losses, I'm like, this dude wants to win. And that's the other thing. People, just pay him. And my response to that is, anywhere he goes is going to pay him. There's 32 teams that will pay him. But I think he wants to go to a team that's going to pay him where he will win. And if he doesn't believe he's going to win here, is he going to try to leave? We're going to have to wait and see.
I'm going to bring a parallel up because you nailed it just now. And you kindled a certain memory, and it's wild because it's very similar. It's on the same trajectory. When Keyshawn Johnson was our wide receiver, 95, 96.
Yeah.
It was 96. And even though it was his first year or whatnot, he wanted out. He was just coming back from USC. He was the Heisman Trophy winner?
I don't think he won the Heisman. I mean, he was the number 1 overall pick.
I thought he won the Heisman. Well, I could be. No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think he did.
You prove me wrong. You're right. You're right.
But I take your point though. You're
yes, it was
high
going
flying
down.
Young guy.
And all right, we got Rich Kotite. They're throwing the ball to this nobody from Hofstra. I'm gonna write a book because my head's not in it with football, but I want to win. Enter Parcells, and he changed that entire narrative. I think that's the crossroads that Garrett Wilson is at right now. There is no mentor. There is no one there to take him under his wing as a coach. I think that's so important. Like, you have all these coaches around the league. I mean, for one, Andy Reid. If you read the Travis Kelce story, the guy was a hothead.
Yeah.
And before he drafted him, he called Kelsey's brother in Philly, who he had a good rapport with. He's like, look, I'm thinking about taking him, but is he going to be on board with me? His brother vouched for him, and he opened up, and he's fine. I think that's what Garrett needs. And I think the money's going to come no matter what. Like you said, there's the entire league.
No matter what. It's not like the Jets have, they're the only team with a checkbook.
No matter what. Exactly. To me, I think once Glenn, he goes through his press conference on Monday, which I think, honestly, he's going to hit it out of the park. It's going to be something so refreshing.
A lot of former players coming up, apparently.
Victor Green, all these guys, man. I mean, you name it, they're going to be there, man.
I love Mickens. I hope Mickens is there. I hope Mo Lewis is there.
Absolutely.
I hope Marvin Jones is there. Like
I
I want to
think
see a lot of the
so.
alumni, the old guys.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's it. That's it right there.
I think the
And
biggest difference, though, the biggest difference with Keyshawn and Garrett, if you think back to when Keyshawn did demand the trade and the Jets eventually demanded the trade, it was he wanted out because he was very good friends and competitive with Joey Galloway, who got a big contract early. And the Jets' policy back then was we don't give out new deals if you have more than 1 year left on your deal. So Keyshawn had 2 years left on his deal, and I think Galloway had 2 on his, but Galloway got a big money extension. And Keyshawn was like, I need a big money extension because my friend just got one. And the Jets were like, well, no, we don't do that. So he was like, well, then you got to trade me to somebody who will. So the Jets traded Keyshawn. They got a really good deal for him. That was, the draft. They were able to make 4 picks in the first round. But your point's taken, right? Young receiver, unhappy with the team, years left on his deal, and gets his way and gets traded out of town. And it does happen. Like I said, I understand what people mean when they say that, they have control, they have the franchise tag and all that. I get that, but that other teams have that too, and they still trade guys. The league has changed. You don't see as much, and it used to be guys like Parcells who would say, well, I'm not going to pay you and I'll just hold you hostage. And, that'll be the end of it. But they, well, of course, Keyshawn was traded, wasn't drafted by Parcells, but he was traded by him, unless I'm mistaken. Yeah. They moved him that offseason.
Right.
Because Parcells made those 4 picks with the picks he got for Keyshawn.
That's right.
But yeah, it's having the contractual rights to a guy doesn't mean you don't trade him, because we see it all the time. And again, I would love to see Garrett Wilson locked up to a 5 or 6 year deal and see him get 130 targets a year and be the best receiver that we've ever seen as a Jet, rather than see him go. But I think he's the guy people are going to want. But I just seen the chat there. I don't know if you caught that from Wild Wave, saying that Sauce has reacted to the hiring of Saleh on Twitter. I don't, like I said, that was my first thought when I heard Saleh DC job, no matter where it was going to be. When I heard Saleh is in line for a DC job, I think I tweeted it out. Like, Saleh is going to call the Jets and try to get Sauce right away.
Yep.
I've heard people say, get Sauce out of here. He had I don't overreact to a bad season, a bad handful of games. Like I said, Sauce cleaned it up late in the year. I think the trade value is low, but as Aaron Glenn said in that clip, the Parcells told everybody's got a price. You can say, oh, this guy's untouchable. Really? Garrett Wilson's untouchable? If someone calls and offers you 2 1s, 2 2s, and a 3, is he still untouchable?
Right.
Then all of a sudden, here you go. We'll pack his bags for him. That's just the way the league works.
I mean, what team right now has 2 first-round picks right now? I
don't know if anyone has 2 1s. It'd have to be like a 1 this year and a 1 next year. I don't think anyone has 2 1s right now.
Right. I mean, shoot, if the Jets are really looking towards the quarterback class of 2026, this may be an option.
Not to cut you off, sorry, but I meant to say it earlier. You mentioned Archie and Eli's situation. Peyton, the Jets could have gotten paid. He went back to school to not be a Jet. Like, you have one dude who altered the course of his life to avoid being a Jet, is his uncle, and the other guy was willing to destroy his reputation to not play in New York. To not play for San Diego and came to New York.
That's right.
So the idea that Arch Manning would come to the Jets if they were in position, I don't think that would happen in a million years. And then when we talk about Shador, his dad has already said he ain't playing for the Jets.
Wow.
I'm not letting him play for that team. So drafting him isn't even a consideration. And Arch, the Jets probably aren't a consideration to him. So I don't think you're getting either one of those guys.
That's true. I mean, it all depends on how that culture is, right, with the Jets. I mean, I think Peyton was going to come out until Parcells said, if you come out, we can't guarantee you that we're going to get you, even though that they have the number 1 overall pick. And then they traded away while the Rams traded up to get Orlando Pace. Oh, my goodness.
And then the Jets traded down twice. They passed on 2 Hall of Fame tackles.
That's right. They picked up Farrier, right?
Yeah, they were in position to take Pace. They passed on him. They traded down. Then they were in position to take Walter Jones, and Seattle traded up to take Walter Jones. The Jets moved down, and the Jets took Farrier. So the Jets passed on 2 Hall of Fame tackles. Farrier had a very good career as a Steeler.
Right.
He did nothing with the Jets. He had 1 good year in his walk year, and he goes to Pittsburgh, and he's a great player. That was listen, I love Parcells, but some of his flubs in the draft are way overlooked by people. He had some Itzickian drafts. He had
Yes.
drafts where he took 10, 11, 12 guys and didn't find a single player.
Right. I mean, it's overshadowed because he won.
Because
Like,
he won.
We were
He won.
starving for wins, and that's the beauty of it. Like, he turned a garbage Jets franchise into a contender. I gotta be honest with you, Glenn. There was a massive discrepancy between the 98 championship game against Denver,
Mhm.
that team, and the 2009-2010 AFC Championship Jets.
Yeah.
They were, how can I put this? It's in 98, as a Jet fan, and you can't hear this from any Jet fan now because how is that possible? I expected the Jets to win. In 98, every time I expected them to win.
Those are the only 2 times in my life as a Jets fan. The Parcells year when they went to the AFC Championship game, and that probably first and second year under Rex, to be fair. But I used to be chilled on Sunday mornings. I'd be like, I'm pretty sure they're going to win today. Like, I didn't think they were going to go undefeated, but every week you felt like there was a good chance they'd win. And that's it. In 37 years as a fan, I've had 3 seasons of going into games confident.
Wow.
And yeah, that Parcells year, man, that was something else. And like I said, and listen, Parcells was no dummy. And again, this is why, as I said earlier, that's the example I always use. Look at that 1-15 Jets team. Throw the record out. Like, anyone familiar with the talent on that team, show them those players, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's an 8 or 9 win team."
Mhm.
You've got, again, that was before the Hugh Douglas trade, of course, but you had Mo Lewis in his prime, you had Marvin Jones in his prime, you had Aaron Glenn, you had Victor Green, you had Adrian Morrell wasn't a great running back, but he was good.
Yep.
Of course they had just drafted Keyshawn. They didn't have him yet. He went 1-15. He was on that 1-15 team as a rookie. But there were enough good players on that team, especially on defense. There were enough good defensive players that you would be like, okay, well, this defense is going to keep you in every game. You've got good corners, you've got good safeties, you've got some really good linebackers. And I felt like Marvin Jones and Mo Lewis were probably the 2 of the best players, if not 2 of the best defensive players on that roster, like 1 and 2 good for a stretch there when they were at the top of their game. So Bill Parcells was probably sitting back. He's a Jersey guy. He wasn't happy in New England, and he had to play the Jets twice a year. And he's probably prepping for the Jets, their 2 meetings a year, and saying, I could win with this team. Like, they got some good players. Their coach just is a moron. And that's what, like, I look at this Jets team of this year, especially when the offensive line got it together and they were playing well. Of course, Saleh was gone by then. But I just felt like with a better coach, they're at least around 500, if not better, but they just didn't have a better coach. So now we hope they do.
Do you feel, just to change this around, right, with the culture and whatnot, maybe training camp once we have our 53 and whatnot, just because of the relationship that Aaron Glenn has with Parcells, do you feel that he may invite Parcells in just to talk to the team, just to tell him, hey, look, you guys have been going through hell and back, but things are changing here. And it starts with this guy right here, just to give him that ringing endorsement, but physically, nothing, verbal from text message or whatever, right then and there. Kind of reminiscent to what Rex did in that AFC divisional game against the Pats the night before with Dennis Byrd.
Yeah.
It was, again, in life, there's always that inspiration where it brings you a level that you can't even expect. And you have that motivation and say, all right, you know what? We're going to shock the world. Do you think that he might bring him in just for a little bit?
Yeah, well, somebody mentioned that early on, or a week or 2 ago on Twitter. If you hire Aaron Glenn, does he bring Bill Parcells? I think he meant like bring him to the facility to have him. I don't know how old Parcells is nowadays. I don't know that he does a lot of traveling, but I think he lives in the Miami area. Like, maybe when you go down to play the Dolphins, if it's early in the year, you bring him into the locker room before the game and say, it's not your own building, but still an opportunity. And, how many of these guys know Parcells? You educate them on Parcells, let them know what he did, what he achieved, bring him out to talk to the team, Hall of Fame coach, won some Super Bowls, had Lawrence Taylor, things like that. Like, you can get these guys up to speed to where the respect for Parcells would be there. And it's a great point. I would see. It's funny because as you were asking the question, I saw where you were going, and I thought to myself, because I'd addressed it last week, I thought, yeah, but he's not going to come up to New York. And then I thought, I think he lives in the. I know he's always been a Florida guy,
Always.
you know, from Jersey. But as he got older, he moved down there. That's why he took that job with the Dolphins.
Mhm.
So I would think if the Jets are in the vicinity, I could see Aaron Glenn saying, "Hey, coach, come in and talk to these kids." Thing is, the difference between being in your building, of course, you have an auditorium, you can make it more formal. But in some capacity, I think, yeah, bring him in at some point. I think that'd be a really good idea.
That would be awesome. Listen, Glenn, I got to tell you, thank you so much, man, for hopping aboard, just talking Jets about the team that we love, man, even though they suck and they have their lulls and whatnot. This is our team. And I know that we're going to have our moment, just like Detroit has right now. And all these teams that, as football historians, Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers, they were the worst. 2 Super Bowls later. You know, I think our time is coming. Little by little, it's going to be to the point where we're going to be so prideful of being Jet fans. We're going to have that same Parcells feel of 98 where we're coming to your town, we're winning. Now listen, Glenn, where can people find you?
You can get me on Twitter at JNRadio_Glenn and at jetnation.com. We've got the most active Jets message board on the web. I know I engage on Twitter a ton as well with other Jets fans, but the forums where you can have the long form engagements and, you know, include media and tweets and things. And it's a great way to, and you get some really in-depth, knowledgeable fans on there. I've been on that website since it was born, you know, with 17, 18 years. I've been a member before I became a contributor. And it's just a great community of Jets fans where there's endless, and it's far from Jets propaganda. I would say most fans on there right now hate the Jets more than they like them. But that's, as I say all the time, are you even a Jets fan if you don't hate the Jets?
Right. Listen, man, thank you so much for your insight, man, and your perspectives out of this world, man. We love it. So you are more than welcome anytime to hop on board.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
You got it, man. Go Jets.
Territory at the 47-yard line. Big draw. And Pennington going for 6. Deep down the field, and it's caught by Santana Moss.